Would you please welcome to the stage our first guest speaker, Dr. Roger Hodkinson.
If you just wear this, sorry, just wear this.
These are clean diapers. Oh. Okay, can you hear me? I'm not contaminating this, they're clean diapers, okay? Well, it's great to be here and to see such a great turnout in Grande-Prairie, and I thank you all for coming to listen to me and to ideas about the future of this once great province. What you're going to hear from me is the warm-up act. I want to make you leave here bloody angry. Because what you're going to hear from me is the unvarnished truth. No conspiracy theories, nothing of that nature. I'm going to tell you what's really happening. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I take them myself. I'm not a conspiracy theorist of any type. I don't believe in graphene oxide. I don't believe that this is some way to depopulate the world as opposed to like Gates and co. I'm not a great resetter. I'm just a pragmatic, honest-to-goodness pathologist who's not an expert in anything, not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm none of the above. What I am is an expert in common sense, and that's in great short supply. I was brought up in Manchester, and for any of you that are from Northern England here, we speak our mind. And that's what you're going to hear from me tonight. Attempts to denigrate me by Snopes is despicable. I've got a CV as long as my arm, and I'm very proud of it. I've kept my nose clean in my entire career. I've been in the front line of evidence-based medicine for the colleges that are attacking me. I call Snopes decomposing maggots. And I include AP in that as well. So let me start off with a brief history of how we got into this mess. Flip-flop Fauci decided he'd circumvent Obama's gain-of-function prohibition. Gain-of-function means the insane idea medically of making something more dangerous so that you can study it better to potentially make a better cure. He sent that through a white-gloved intermediary to Wuhan to do the work. And it escaped accidentally. That wasn't the intent. This is not some grand plan to depopulate the world. It's a lousy bioterrorism weapon. But it did escape, and it got on planes to Milan faster than you can spit, where there was a very large population of elderly people in nursing homes, the highest in Europe. They started dying like flies. Ian Ferguson, that congenital idiot at Imperial College London, got hold of it and projected Armageddon. That created panic on the desk of every premier and prime minister around the world on the very next morning. And they all instituted these ridiculous mandates that have no basis in medical science. They all copied each other. And this was all, of course, fed by the media, who gorge on crises, sells advertising. None of these interventions work. Repeat after me. None. Work. None of these goddamn things work. You're being forced to walk around with a diaper on your face for over a year. Do you think medicine might have figured it out with previous flu epidemics? That it was worthwhile? Of course we would. There's no evidence for masks. It's like stopping a mosquito with a chain link fence. It's so ludicrous. And similarly with the other mandates. Social distancing doesn't work because this stuff's spread by aerosol. It's in every aisle in Walmart, whether there's someone in there or not. It's the roulette game of life. Get used to it. Death happens. I'm speaking to you as a pathologist now. You can't stop death, okay? Previous years, we got used to it. We drive to work every morning. You could be facing death 100 times with someone dropping a cigarette coming at you with a head-on. We accept that, don't we? It's part of the risk of life. Politicians should not take every risk of life away from you. We can manage it ourselves. Thank you very much. Similarly with lockdowns. Lockdowns have been shown categorically to show so much more harm than any potential benefit. In the history of medicine, we have never quarantined the well to protect the sick. It's never happened before. It's ludicrous in its concept. We don't do that. We protect those that need protecting. As per the Great Barrington Declaration, focus protection. Everyone else should have been allowed to live their life totally normally. And in fact, the gurus say, like John Ioannidis in Stanford, the world's most respected epidemiologist, and Peter McCullough, if we'd done nothing in 2019, this would have been nothing like a bad seasonal flu. Sadly, some people would have died, like they always do with the flu. I'm not callous. I'm a physician, I'm caring. Every death matters. But it was unavoidable. And if they'd done that, this would have gone away by now. We wouldn't have needed any of these ridiculous mandates. People wouldn't have been committing suicide because their companies were going bankrupt. No, none of that would have happened. Instead, the whole thing was prolonged by these ridiculous programs, isolation, vaccination, and so on. It would all be over by now. So nothing works. They're all totally arbitrary measures, no consensus in medical science whatsoever, pulled out of the bag by politicians who are simply trying to show that they are your defenders from everything. Can't be done. This whole play out is rather like you break the will of someone you're interrogating. You do three things to break someone's will. You create fear, and you let it go a little bit, then you ramp it up, and you let it go and you ramp it up. Fear, PCR test, the graph in the morning paper, drove fear into the population that what they were saying was true, that Armageddon really was coming when it never was. They knew it was a lousy test. I'm in the business. I'm the chairman of a biotech company in North Carolina that does DNA sequencing. I know PCR. It was never intended for the purpose that it's being used. It's a lousy test, 95% false positives in people who are perfectly well. And then you do contact tracing, you take out 10 times that number. And guess what? The workplace is decimated. Fear, followed by intentionally keeping people ignorant. You lot, kept intentionally ignorant so that all you hear is the government's propaganda. That ignorance was maintained by the silencing of politicians, the media of all types, and particularly physicians, so that you've been kept ignorant of anything that could be considered counter-propaganda. So you've been left with no guideposts to form your own opinion, to support your own, perhaps, gut feeling that this is all absolute nonsense. But the third element of breaking your willpower is isolation, translation, self-quarantine. That's how you break the will of people in Guantanamo Bay, okay? You have them cowering in a corner, fearful, totally separated from anyone else, totally isolated. That's what's happened to you. And so what happens when you've got someone trembling in a corner like that, totally ignorant? You've got them in the palm of your hand, and you dangle the escape, the vaccine, and people are grabbing it and saying, oh, thank you very much, you're our savior. They created this mess, and you're expected to put your lives on the line to get them off the hook? Do you understand how you're being duped? Modern medicine is totally impotent at controlling the spread of an upper respiratory tract virus, period. It cannot be done. We have to learn to live with it like we've done with every other flu pandemic. So believe nothing you're being told. It's all a pack of lies from start to finish, amplified by the grossest distortions of the English language you could possibly imagine. Let's deal with them one at a time. Case. Dr. Modre, is a case someone who's actually sick in front of you? We don't call cases false positive PCR results in the working world. That is not a case. That is a false positive result from a ridiculous test used in the wrong application. They've played that to the hilt. Fact. The colleges would have us physicians only relate to you facts, whereas they say, that's the facts they say they have on their side. They say, do not relate hearsay, relate facts. Oh, and they also go on to say, and do not speak to your neighbors. That's in print, by the way, from the registrar of the college of this province. Physicians, do not speak to your neighbor about anything that could be considered hearsay. Well, that's Orwellian, because exactly what government and colleges are saying is hearsay. Not the facts at all. When they've been asked to produce the facts in court, they've declined. Just 2 days ago, when our medical officer of health was on live podcast to all the physicians in the province, they were supposed to have had the evidence produced for that meeting. And guess what? Oh, we don't have it ready. I tell you why it isn't ready, because it doesn't exist. So, here's a question for you. I'd like you to put up your hand. Do any of you in this audience know of anyone who's been vaccinated who either died or had a serious complication? By serious, I mean heart attack, pulmonary embolus, stroke. Look at that number. Look at that number. Just look around it. Look around you. Look at the hands. Yeah, this is a straw poll. This vaccine is killing people. That's why I'm so pissed. There was no emergency that predicated the concept of having an emergency vaccine. This was never a public health emergency in a month of Sundays. Nowhere close. Absolutely nowhere close to a public emergency. But they used that as an excuse for developing this vaccine at warp speed. That was the predicate. If you take away that predicate, there is no reason to vaccinate anyone, anywhere, for anything now. It should stop immediately, because that was a false pretense. All that was needed was focused protection, as it's stated in the Great Barrington Declaration. That was it. And the rest of you, take vitamin D, zinc, maybe hydroxychloroquine if you can get it. We'll come to that. They prohibited the access to hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, as you know. So what are they saying to you all when you get sick? You think you've got COVID, you go to the hospital, and you have a positive PCR test, which with the right symptoms is probably a true positive. What do they say to you? Well, you know what? We're not going to admit you because your PO2 is not low enough. Subtext, Dr. Modre will confirm this. Come back when you're blue. Instead of sending you home with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which according to Peter McCullough in the States, would save 85% of people presenting to hospital with COVID. Those people are destined to come back blue when it's so much more difficult to treat. Doctors like me and everyone else, I don't prescribe, I was a pathologist, as you know, but there's a prohibition on any physician using these agents in that circumstance. And that's medical malpractice of the grossest order. So let's talk about the consequences of vaccination. In the States, according to the whistleblower within the CDC, who's signed off on an affidavit subject to jail term if it is false, The whistleblower at the CDC has stated in the suit that there's been 45, to date, up to now, 45,000 deaths in the States directly attributable to the vaccine. Directly attributable to. Now, that's deaths. That doesn't include the strokes, the heart attacks, the pulmonary emboli, the Guillain-Barré syndrome. None of that. The serious consequences that have not killed people. That's on top of that 45,000. Do you see how you're being duped? That number is an order of magnitude higher than all the complications of vaccines over the last 30 years. Consolidated. 30 years of consolidation is less than the 45,000 that have happened in 6 months. 45,000. Other vaccine programs have been shut down at 25 deaths alone. This is 45,000, okay? Translation, for Canada, 4,500. If they were caring to keep the stats, do you know what? They've stopped the program of reporting vaccine-related adverse events in Canada because they don't want to know. That translates into about 450 in Alberta. Carefully hidden, not reported, because they don't want you to know. They call myocarditis mild. Dr. Modry will amplify what I'm going to say. Myocarditis is never mild. It kills heart cells, the pump of the body. It could present decades later with congestive cardiac failure because of reducing the cardiac reserve. Myocarditis is mild? Are you kidding me? Young men coming down with myocarditis is mild? I don't think so. For something that they're not going to be killed from? Outrageous. What about the unstudied effects with good scientific basis for infertility, on pregnancy, on the fetus, killing off randomly cells throughout your entire body due to thromboses happening in capillaries on a random disseminated basis that could result 20 years from now with premature onset of cardiac failure and dementia. Unstudied. Does that worry you? You're not being told that, are you? What about the fetus? There's a lot of people here with gray hair. There's one word that should shut down this program. One word. Thalidomide. Thalidomide. Given to pregnant women without any studies of whether or not it was teratogenic. They're doing that now. They're injecting pregnant women now without an appropriate clinical trial that would normally go on for 5 or 10 years. Does that get your attention? In other words, you're the lab rats. You've probably seen that cartoon, two lab rats in a cage, one saying to the other, "Have you been vaccinated yet?" And the other rat says, "Of course not, it hasn't been tested on humans yet." We're going to talk about kids now. The Aztecs. Has it come to this? Child sacrifice to appease the new gods? The politicians running this show? Has it come to this? Sacrificing our kids? Kids are not dying of this. There hasn't been a single death in North America from a child without a serious underlying comorbidity. None. And they're proposing to vaccinate them with all these serious risks? Are you insane? We do not do that to our children. We do not make child sacrifices to appease the politicians. Asymptomatic spread does not happen to any significant degree. Period. It's Medical Students 101. If you don't have enough snot in your nose, you're not going to give it to someone else. It's to do with dose. For God's sake, get a grip. Children have more likelihood of dying of lightning or drowning than dying of COVID. Teachers are not going to be getting it from children. That's a fiction for people wanting to sit at home and earn a salary that you're paying. And what about these kids? Listen, in Australia, just yesterday, 24,000 kids herded into a football stadium. 24,000 to be jabbed. No informed consent. None. No parents there. And apparently, subject to verification, 2 kids died as a result of it. That's okay. Oh, that's all right. Kids being induced into this experiment with ice cream, lollipops. You being offered lottery tickets. Do you need a lottery ticket to get to people to understand that there's something so terrible coming down the pike? No, you got your head screwed on. You wouldn't need a lottery ticket to persuade you to get a vaccine if it was really needed, because you're common sense people. A lot of these outbreaks in kids that you're hearing now are due to another virus called respiratory syncytial virus. It gets technical, RSV. It presents in very similar ways to COVID, and that's what's causing a lot of these outbreaks amongst children right now. So children basically are already vaccinated. They do not need a vaccine they're not dying of it, they don't need it, it's not going to protect them, but they've already got natural immunity from all their coughs and colds that they've had previously. Immunity to the whole virus family, not just the bit of the spike protein. I'm running out of time. Pregnancy, we talked about that. And passports. What a gross invasion of your privacy. Again, there's one put down for passports. Do we ask people who are HIV positive to walk around with a tattoo on their forehead? No, we do not, for good reason. They're expected to be responsible in their sexual behavior, just as you are with the coughs and colds. You don't go coughing in people's faces. So instead of that, passports are now forcing these decisions: career or death, job or death, life or death. University of Washington will not transplant people on the list now unless they've been vaxxed. In France, you've got to have it to get into a food store. Food or death. That's where it's going. It's your choice. So, I'll close. There's a lot more at stake here than simply COVID. It's democracy that's at stake. And each one of you has got to persuade one person a day in this madness. You've got to stand up and speak, no matter what the consequences are, because there's way too much at stake here than simply COVID. So in summary, remember, you can't be unvaxxed. Once it's in you, it's in you. You can't vaccinate out of this problem because the RNA virus is always one step ahead of you. Booster doses indefinitely. It's simply politics playing medicine, as I've said before, and that's a very dangerous game. It should be simply common sense, like you've got lots of. The socialist dystopia is looming ahead. I won't get into the politics of it, that's the reason for this meeting. But you've got to wake up. You've got to know what's happening. If this could happen in Australia full of orangutans down there, if it could happen in Australia with policemen on horses, with riot police shooting rubber bullets at you, if it could happen in Australia, it can happen here with fancy socks in Ottawa directing traffic. So stand up and be counted, or you'll be individually responsible for what happens.